Imagine being locked away for a crime you didn't commit. A nightmare, isn't it? Now let's delve into a real-life incident that turned this nightmare into reality. Meet John Doe. His story is not just a tale of injustice but a stark reminder of the flaws in our legal system. On an average day, John was going about his usual routine, unaware that his life was about to take a drastic turn. Police officers showed up at his doorstep, armed with a warrant for his arrest. The crime? A brutal robbery that took place on the other side of town. John, bewildered, could only insist on his innocence as he was handcuffed and led away. His pleas fell on deaf ears. The evidence against him was circumstantial at best. A vague description of the suspect that somewhat matched John, a stolen item found miles away from his home, and a witness that was less than certain. However, the prosecution spun a narrative that painted John as the perpetrator. The trial was a whirlwind. John's defense team fought tooth and nail, pointing out the inconsistencies in the evidence, the lack of motive, and John's solid alibi. However, the prosecution's story seemed to resonate more with the jury. The gavel fell, and the verdict was announced guilty. John's world came crashing down. The shock and disbelief were palpable. He was an innocent man, yet he was being sentenced for a crime he had no part in. The courtroom was a blur, the judge's words a distant echo. The reality of the situation was too overwhelming. From a free man to a convicted felon, John's life took a tragic turn in a matter of days. It's a chilling testament to how quickly one's life can change, how a single mistake in the justice system can cost an innocent person their freedom. Sentenced to decades behind bars, their life as they knew it was over. This is the harsh reality of unjust convictions. As we delve deeper into John's story, we'll explore his life behind bars, his fight for freedom, and the aftermath of his release. Stay tuned. Stripped of their freedom, they were thrust into a world of constant surveillance and harsh realities. Imagine, for a moment, what it's like to have every aspect of your life monitored and controlled. No personal space, no privacy, and no control over your own time. This was the world that these innocent people found themselves in. A world where they were not seen as individuals, but as numbers, as commodities. Life behind bars is a challenge on multiple levels. Firstly, there's the physical aspect. The harsh conditions that inmates endure are notorious. Inadequate healthcare, substandard food, and overcrowded cells are just the tip of the iceberg. Then, there's the mental and emotional toll. The isolation from loved ones, the endless days spent in a small confined space, and the constant threat of violence can be overwhelming. Maintaining sanity and hope in such an environment is a feat in itself. Yet these individuals managed to do it. They clung to the belief in their innocence even when the world outside had seemingly turned its back on them. While dealing with the daily struggles of prison life, they also had to navigate the complex legal system. They had to learn the laws, understand the court procedures, and gather evidence to prove their innocence. All this, while living in an environment that was designed to break them down. They wrote letters, filed appeals, and reached out to anyone who might listen. They spent countless hours in the prison library, poring over law books, trying to find a loophole, a precedent, anything that could help their case. They also had to deal with the stigma of being a convict. Even though they knew they were innocent, they were treated as guilty. They were shunned, humiliated, and dehumanized. Yet they refused to let this define them. They refused to be reduced to a label, to a stereotype. Despite the odds stacked against them, they held on to the belief that the truth would one day set them free. They held on to hope, onto their dignity, onto their humanity. And in the end, that's what kept them going. That's what kept them fighting for their freedom. In the face of adversity, they refused to give up. The conviction had been laid down, the gavel had struck, and the sentence was served. But for those who knew in their hearts that they were innocent, this was not the end of their story. It was merely the beginning of a different kind of struggle, a fight for freedom. These battles were fought on several fronts. The incarcerated individuals themselves, armed with nothing more than their unwavering belief in their innocence and the burning desire for justice, would spend countless hours in prison libraries, learning the intricacies of the legal system, poring over law books, and preparing their own appeals. Meanwhile, on the outside, their legal teams would be tirelessly working to challenge the conviction. These lawyers, often working pro bono, were driven by an unshakable conviction in their client's innocence and a deep-seated commitment to justice. They would sift through mountains of evidence, look for new witnesses, and challenge every aspect of the prosecution's case. Sometimes, even advocacy groups would join the fight. Organizations dedicated to fighting wrongful convictions would bring their considerable resources and expertise to the table. They would use their platforms to raise awareness about the case, rally public support, and sometimes even push for changes in the law that could help secure their clients' release. There were setbacks, of course. Appeals would be denied, new evidence would be dismissed, and legal battles would be lost. But with each setback, the determination of these individuals and their supporters would only grow stronger. They knew that the road to justice was long and winding, filled with obstacles and challenges, but they also knew that they had to keep going, keep fighting, keep believing, and so they did. Day after day, year after year, they kept pushing, kept advocating, kept hoping. They refused to let the walls of their prison cells define their lives. They refused to let their wrongful convictions define their identities. They refused to give up. The fight was long and exhausting, but their determination never wavered. After years, sometimes decades, their moment of freedom finally arrived. The air was thick with anticipation. A palpable tension filled the room. Years of waiting, hoping, and dreaming had led up to this one moment. The heavy prison doors that had kept them confined, separated from the world, were about to swing open. Imagine the emotions that flooded their hearts: relief, joy, fear, and disbelief intertwined in a complex dance. It was a feeling akin to being reborn, a second chance at life that few ever get. Their hearts pounded in their chests, an echo of the countdown to their newfound freedom. The reactions of their loved ones were just as intense, if not more so. Loved ones who had waited anxiously, praying for this day to come, wept tears of joy. Their faces reflected a kaleidoscope of emotions: relief, happiness, and a hint of apprehension. It was a moment they had imagined over and over, a scene they had played out in their minds countless times, but the reality was more overwhelming than any of them could have ever imagined. And then came the realization, the understanding that they could finally start rebuilding their lives. The world outside the prison walls was vastly different from the one they had left behind. They were stepping into a new era, one that had moved on without them. But it was a challenge they were willing to embrace, a battle they were ready to fight. The taste of freedom was sweet yet laced with the bitter memories of their past. Their lives had been put on hold, their dreams frozen in time, but now they had the opportunity to thaw those dreams, to pick up the pieces and start anew. The journey to freedom was far from easy. It was a path laden with obstacles and heartbreak, but their resilience and determination had led them to this moment, a moment that signified the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Stepping into the world as a free person, they were ready to reclaim their stolen years. They were ready to breathe in the world, to live the life that had been so unjustly taken from them. They were ready to finally start living. Freedom, however, came with its own set of challenges. After spending years, even decades, behind bars for crimes they didn't commit, these innocent individuals were finally free. But the world they stepped back into was not the same one they had left. Technology had advanced, social norms had evolved, and they themselves were profoundly changed. Adjusting to life on the outside was a Herculean task. Simple tasks like using a smartphone or navigating public transportation became daunting challenges. They had to relearn how to live in a world that had moved on without them. But the physical adjustments were just the tip of the iceberg. The emotional and psychological toll was even more profound. Many grappled with feelings of isolation, anger, and mistrust. Their relationships with family and friends had been strained and in some cases irreparably damaged. Perhaps the most insidious struggle was dealing with the stigma of being a former prisoner. Despite their innocence, they were often viewed with suspicion and prejudice. Employment opportunities were scarce, and even when they found work, they were often underpaid and undervalued. Seeking compensation for their wrongful conviction was another uphill battle. While some states in the U.S. have compensation statutes in place, the process is often slow and fraught with bureaucratic red tape. Moreover, no amount of money can truly compensate for the years of freedom lost, the relationships damaged, and the psychological torment endured. Yet, in the face of these immense obstacles, they showed extraordinary resilience. Instead of succumbing to bitterness or despair, many used their painful experiences as a catalyst for change. They became fierce advocates for justice reform, using their voices to shed light on the flaws in the legal system and to fight for others who are wrongly convicted. Despite the hardships, they remained resilient, using their experience to advocate for justice reform and to help others who are wrongly convicted. Their stories are a testament to the human spirit's indomitable strength and an urgent call to action for us all.